O ex-piloto de caça da Marinha dos Estados Unidos, Ryan Graves, fez revelações sobre OVNIs a estudantes da Universidade de Yale, nos Estados Unidos, em uma mini conferência organizada na própria universidade. Vamos ver um pouquinho das declarações do Ryan Graves. E se você gostar desse vídeo, não esqueça de curtir, comentar e compartilhar, pois é a forma do YouTube recomendar o canal a mais pessoas.
Behind that object was a formation of about 4 to 6 other objects that were seemingly smaller, more reminiscent of what we were traditionally used to seeing in Virginia Beach and elsewhere, but the gimbal object was larger and more distinct than what we had seen before. The formation of objects were in a wedge formation, and they were proceeding essentially in this direction. They turned, they all jumbled up, you know, they weren't executing like a formation flying mechanics as they turned, and then they reformed in the wedge and proceeded 180 degrees out. The gimbal object, which was essentially following that, it paused for a second and then instantaneously reversed direction and followed the formation. Through later analysis, I've understood that the instantaneous change in direction actually represented a vertical U-turn, because my frame of reference was from a God's eye view radar display. So I don't get to see that vertical change in altitude. It just appears as kind of a pause and a bounce, right? So whatever this was conducting a very tight vertical U-turn in about 200 feet of airspace, which, you know, an F-18 takes about a minimum at 5,000 feet, 3,500 feet to do a vertical turn. And in one particular incident has been what appears to be a repeatable string of sightings that started in 2022 at Langley Air Force Base. And Langley Air Force Base is almost like a sister base to the base I was operating out of. Instead of F-18s, they have F-22s. They're about 100 miles from DC, and they actually provide quick response, fighter response to DC should there be any type of threat. And it's about 80 miles north of the airspace that we were operating in when we had our incidents. And starting in 2022, they had a number of incursions of unknown objects over the base at very low altitude that were about car-sized. They hovered over the base, doing altitude changes of about 1,000 feet before departing back over the ocean. There was about 5 of them. It lasted for about 2 hours. And it lasted for about a handful of days. 2023, during the same kind of period of time, right before Christmas, the same thing happened again. This time there were 2 kind of forms of objects. One that, you know, appeared to be more spherical, another one that was more flattened, if you will, or disc-shaped. The spherical objects came up the bay again, executed a flight at about 3,000 feet. The individual objects were separated by about half a mile or a mile. There's photos of all this. And they proceeded up the bay, stopped at Langley Air Force Base for about an hour and a half, conducted some type of operation, and then proceeded in that counterclockwise back over the water and exited. The second group, which operated at about treetop level, as it was described, went in a clockwise fashion. Instead of stopping at the base, they stopped at the nuclear facility that was on the west side of the bay for about the same amount of time before departing. There was a local eyewitness who contacted us. We ended up, you know, routing that witness to the FBI. And actually, recently, he was on 60 Minutes last weekend talking about the New Jersey drone incidents. Butner. So that was 2023.
I'm wondering if it's plausible to assume that these things might be operating underwater, and what, you know, some of your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a common thought about whether they're operating from the water, both in the New Jersey instance as well as Langley instance. A lot of these objects originated from over the water. For us, when we're flying in the jet, it's very hard for us to discern whether something goes into the water. We'll just lose radar contact as it gets close to it. So from that perspective, I don't have an answer. You know, I have many reports of these objects going into or out of the water. But yeah, I think that's really all I can say on it. I just mentioned, you know, Americans are safe aerospace. My nonprofit, the amount of like blocking and tackling that we do on the ground every day to kind of move this conversation forward can't really be understated. And we now are in a position with our reputation and brand and connections that we've been making to expand internationally. We have a group within Australia that's very interested in creating a sister organization. Same with a parliament member in Japan. I'm going to Dubai to speak at a UAP conference in a month and a half. And at my last nonprofit, we had the economic advisor from Saudi Arabia. And there's a number of other countries as well. So, you know, this very much is a global phenomenon. I had a good conversation with the economic advisor about sightings they've been having. But we're really excited in fundraising actively now within the nonprofit to be able to formalize a reporting system and expand it internationally and be able to license that reporting system out to these individual companies, which will allow us to get a global look at the type of data we've been receiving in the United States, which can then arm those individual countries to have the same policies and reforms that we've had here within the country. On the technical and the VC side, I see great opportunity on the VC side. So much so that I spent a year trying to stand one up. I was unsuccessful in raising the funds, but would have been my first fund. But, you know, that try-use model that I just described about, you know, looking for technology that has those military as well as commercial use cases that might be relevant for the UAP topic extend beyond just sensing. It goes into advanced material science and metamaterials. It goes into exotic propulsion. It goes into communication systems, novel energy generation. And that work is going on. And, you know, interestingly enough, some of the people that are doing this work have, you know, claimed that they have worked on reverse engineering programs for the government. And, you know, these are DARPA-funded efforts, Air Force research labs, and the like. And these particular cases I'm talking about often were funded by the National Science Foundation as well. And I've spent the past 8 months or so working with leadership at the National Science Foundation. And this recently culminated about a month ago, but you know, the director of their technology innovation program is ready to publicly establish a UAP program office at the National Science Foundation. And I'm currently brokering a meeting with him and representatives within Congress to continue to work on that. And that, you know, that is a key piece, I think, that is going to energize this innovation ecosystem to be able to actually, you know, in the manner that we do with every other company and technology, you know, in this country, start utilizing, you know, national resources and grant funding to be able to move this conversation forward. And again, it's not just sensing. The portfolio that we're talking about constructing goes into advanced material science and others that a lot of people would consider to be very adjacent, if not directly related to UAP. And again, that director has offered to brief Congress on technologies they've already invested in that would be part of this new portfolio. I don't want to alarm anyone or make anyone think I think these are hostile. I don't really get that intent, but to just constantly hover over near military activity and bases, you know, and civilian population centers, I mean, that's what we would do. So ultimately, I don't think we have enough information to really say, but that's one logical conclusion you'll probably hear out there.
Então aí vocês viram as falas do Graves, né? Ele comenta ali sobre o caso do Gimbal. A forma que ele fala dá a impressão de que talvez ou ele estivesse no caça em que teria filmado o Gimbal ou estaria em voo junto com aquele caça. A forma com que ele descreve a situação do Gimbal, que seria um objeto que estaria inclusive em formação, teriam outros objetos parecidos com o Gimbal junto com ele, né? Ele faz aquela virada vista no vídeo justamente para poder seguir a formação desses outros objetos. Uma outra coisa que é interessante que eu posso pontuar aqui é que a National Science Foundation, que é a organização dos Estados Unidos de apoio científico, é a organização que coloca o dinheiro na mesa, né, para pesquisar o assunto, parece que ela agora vai abrir um gabinete para estudar fenômenos anômalos. E isso vai trazer com certeza muitos avanços para esse assunto, porque hoje o assunto não é estudado simplesmente porque não há dinheiro a ser ofertado para as universidades, para pesquisadores oferecerem bolsas, enfim, de mestrado, de doutorado, para que esse assunto possa ser pesquisado. Tendo a inclusão da NSF com esse assunto, o governo dos Estados Unidos vai poder repassar dinheiro para as universidades, para pesquisadores, e aí sim você vai criar uma demanda, e a partir da demanda você vai ter aí as universidades pesquisando não só métodos, como falou Ryan Graves, de detecção de OVNIs, como também metamateriais, fragmentos desses OVNIs que estão aí espalhados aí pelos Estados Unidos e ao redor do globo, com alguns pesquisadores, inclusive com, claro, os próprios militares. Uma outra coisa interessante que o Graves pontua são os investidores estrangeiros. Tem lá pessoas interessadas na Austrália, no Japão, e ele revelou agora que vai estar daqui a 1 mês e meio em Dubai, onde tem investidores tanto em Dubai quanto na Arábia Saudita, ali no Oriente Médio, que estão interessados em pesquisar o assunto. Então vejam só aonde que estamos chegando aí. E claro, algumas empresas vão querer obter lucro com isso e outros governos ali nos Estados Unidos vão querer mais informações para ter seus próprios programas e para poder pesquisar suas próprias armas. Então é isso, o assunto vem tendo cada vez mais novos players, novos envolvidos, novos países e ainda os investidores milionários e bilionários ao redor do mundo agora entrando na jogada. Por hoje é isso, um abraço e até a próxima.